Well, welcome back to The Developing Doctor. The whole idea of this show is that the answer to a hard medical career isn't to stop caring or to care less. It's to use your heart more, not less. But saying care more can sound really naive and shallow if you're the one who's exhausted and quietly wondering whether you can just keep doing this. So today, we're going to get into the practical things about what comes next when you decide I need to do something different and pivot. Which is why I'm so excited about my guest today, Dr. Bertina Hooks, a board certified internal medicine physician, healthcare executive, and entrepreneur who now spends her time helping other physicians navigate burnout, leadership transitions, and career reinvention. She's the founder of Pinnacle Business Academy and host of the Mindful Practice podcast. And her own turning point was about as dramatic as they come, a life-threatening crisis, which took her from overnight, really, from physician to patient. But instead of ending her career, that experience rebuilt it around coaching, telehealth, entrepreneurship, helping clinicians design careers they can sustain. So with that, Dr. Hooks, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I have a lot I wanted to dig into today, but really what I want to start with is just that pivot. So
Mhm.
so many people that I run into say, "Oh, I want to leave," or I need to do something different," and then it stops there. And so, what do you do to actually move from "I think I need to do something different" to actually pivoting?
So in my circumstances, I actually had been experiencing burnout about 4 to 5 years into my career. And I was a full-time hospitalist at the time and just wasn't feeling like I was enjoying. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. I really didn't have the language to kind of understand or express what I was feeling, but I knew something was off. I knew that I didn't enjoy medicine as much, like the day to day. Always wanted to be a physician since I was like 5 years old. And so to kind of reach, this point in your career where you're attending, you're
Mhm.
comfortable with managing, taking care of patients, and really losing sight of that was the point. And so I tried to transition, I guess, into locums just because I had been employed for so long to have some more autonomy and freedom. And then I think I enjoyed that immensely. And so I ended up starting my own practice that kind of expanded into different locations. And then the pandemic hit. And so that was a big transition, I think, for a lot of physicians. And after working on the front lines as a hospitalist for those 3, 4 years during both waves of the pandemic, I realized that I wanted something more. I really felt that, my identity as a person was really engulfed by medicine. And so I didn't really have an idea of who I was. And then in 2022, I was actually hospitalized for a life-threatening, infection. I had strep necrotizing fasciitis, and I ended up having a right below the knee amputation at that time. And so that really was the real pivot, the push for me to pivot. I did go back to working clinically, but I just redefined how I practiced. I had to take some time to recover from that trauma and to do rehabilitation. But during that time, I did a lot of self-reflection.
Mhm.
And I realized, I said, who am I outside of medicine? What defines me? What are my goals and my values? And so that led me to, start exploring other career pathways within medicine and non-clinical aspects as well. And it also inspired me to form Pinnacle Business Academy because I didn't want physicians to have to pivot or gain clarity or reinvent their careers or redefine success without the proper tools. I felt I had lived it, I had experienced it, and now I wanted to share what I learned with other physicians so that they could transition on their own terms and build, sustainable careers, because that's the whole point. I mean, we go into medicine because we want to help patients, but we also need to help ourselves. And so burnout to me was kind of the catalyst, right, for my journey, for my reinvention.
Wow, a lot of powerful stuff there. I mean, just starting with, wanting to do this since you were a little girl and then
Mhm.
getting to the point where you think, oh, I don't know if this is what I thought it was going to be. And it sounds like even before your medical illness or your incident,
Mhm.
you had started to make a pivot. And
Yes.
so many times people think about pivots and it just comes up all of a sudden and it's rather reactive rather than
Mhm.
strategic. And I know that's something
Right.
that you've talked about before. So
Yes.
you've kind of hinted at this, but what's the difference between reactive and strategic transition, and how do you help people
Right.
realize the difference and sort of become more strategic about changes?
Right. That's a great question because I think a lot of people in burnout or, wanting to transition or pivot, it may be reactive, it may be emotional, but I
Mhm.
think being strategic about a pivot is really key. And that requires intention and time and patience. I think you really have to take time to say, I don't want to just quit this job, but I want to figure out what my ideal job is, what things align with my values and beliefs. Maybe I like more academics or I like more teaching, or maybe I want to do more telehealth because I want to have, work remotely and not have to commute. So you really have to define what your values and where you want to focus your energy and create an ideal job profile. And then I think you also want to be strategic in, your pivot in exploring different things. I think a
Mhm.
lot of physicians don't know the different options that they have. They feel like when they finish their medical education that the only option they have is to practice clinically. And yes, you can practice clinically and that's the whole goal, right? But you can practice it on your own terms. Does that mean
Mhm.
you want to have your own practice or do DPC or concierge medicine? Do you want to do telehealth? Do you want to do medical consulting or medical expert work? The options are endless, but we're not exposed to what those options are. And that's what I help a lot of physicians do. I help them gain clarity and I help them gain a sense of what roles do I want to play and how. And then the next step is how do I pursue those roles? And that's the
Mhm.
strategy behind it. So that may be, optimizing their LinkedIn profile or their CV or doing some per diem work so they can kind of explore something, informational interviews with other colleagues in the industry, networking. There's so many things that you can do. And then once you get a better sense, then you can pivot into the career that you really want. But that takes time and patience. And it has to be very intentional. So you have to put a lot of thought and effort into it.
Yeah, I think that sometimes that surprises people. I found is, it
Mhm.
took us a long time to get to the point where we were attendings. And then when it doesn't work out the way that we planned,
Right.
there's this idea that I need to change this right now, but it took time to
Mhm.
get where you are and it'll take time to get to your next spot sometimes, which I think surprises
Right,
people.
right. And I feel like there's a lot of urgency. Like some doctors may feel like I
Yes.
have to pivot right now, but there's things you can do to be protective. I mean, with burnout, you can start setting boundaries, you can start saying no, you start delegating things, you can do some recovery, you can set a plan in place so that you have time to figure it out and make
Mhm.
your next step.
Does it matter why a person is thinking about a pivot? So, we talk about
Mhm.
burnout or moral injury, or maybe
Mhm.
just the job's not right.
Mhm.
Does the right move and does knowing where you're at and then identifying the right move, are those two things related in your mind?
I think so. I think knowing where you're at and what you want to change and then putting a plan in place of where you want to go. Sometimes it's not linear though, the journey. And so for me, I was like, I just want to, provide for my family and utilize the skills that I have. But it evolved. The coaching that I had, just one small thing that I just wanted to help, maybe one or two physicians that were dealing with the same things has expanded. Now I have podcasts, I'm writing books. And so the vision may change. And I think
Mhm.
it's just important to give yourself permission to evolve as you go through life. Your goals, your values, the milestones in your life, what you're experiencing in your life, your priorities may change. And it's okay for your career goals to change along with that.
How does someone know if they're in pivot territory? How do you separate, oh, this is just a bad stretch, or, this
Mhm.
was bad luck, or this was just a temporary illness? How do you know that you're
Mhm.
in pivot territory as opposed to just something that'll pass?
I think when you realize that something has to change, I think burnout is a signal, moral injury is a signal. And so when those things don't go away, I mean, one of the things I always say is that burnout doesn't go away with rest, right? If you take a vacation,
Mhm.
burnout's still there when you come back to your job. So it's that, that chronic stressors that you're experiencing at your job or things like that that are leading to emotional and physical exhaustion. It can affect your health. It can affect your mental and physical health. So all of those things you need to be paying attention to, I think, and realizing that I need to make a change. If you're really dissatisfied with your job, then that's a signal that you need to change how you practice medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny when you're in the middle of burnout or when you're experiencing moral injury,
Mhm.
we're so programmed to think that it's just part of the job, right? And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember there was a point when I was walking to work and just wondering what would it be like if I just kept walking? Like, how long would it take for someone to realize that I didn't show up? Which, as I
Right.
say that out loud right now, is not a normal thought. But
Yes.
at the moment, I was like, oh, this is just part of my day. And
Mhm.
we don't realize that we're just stuck in these patterns sometimes.
Right. And I think we are conditioned, in our training to accept these things as the new normal, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. You can be fulfilled in your career, but you just have to define what makes you fulfilled and go after it. That's the key.
You talked about the different things that you've done as you kind of have been in your
Mhm.
pivot. And I
Mhm.
think one of the things that I hear sometimes is, oh, being a physician and clinical work is the only thing that I know how to do. These are the only
Mhm.
skills that I have. What have you discovered that you bring to the table, that you were like, gosh, I've had this all along and I just wasn't
Right.
unaware of this. These are the skills that I have.
Right. I think most physicians, I mean, we don't realize it that our clinical skills are just one aspect of
Mhm.
what we utilize every day. We use written, verbal communication. We help with critical thinking and decision making. We deal with risk management. We also deal with, but like, those skills are transferable into other industries. So,
Absolutely.
having your medical degree means that you're an educator, you're a leader, and you also can be an entrepreneur. I know a lot of physicians may not feel that that is, but what an entrepreneur is someone who finds a solution to a pain point that someone has. They're
Mhm.
providing a product or service. And also, when you're following in alignment with your values and goals, I think that's when you realize that maybe you are interested in real estate, or
Mm.
you're interested in entrepreneurship or medical consulting. Explore it. If you have a natural interest and you start to explore it, then you can find out if it's a good fit for you.
So what do I think I've heard you describe or seen in your writing something about the
Mm.
Phoenix position pivot framework, and you
Yes.
walk through some stages. Can you kind of talk through what that looks like and how you help
Yes.
people pass through those stages?
Yes. So the Phoenix pivot framework is something I designed as I kind of developed with my own pivot and my own transition. And there's five different pillars. It starts with fire, and then the last step is pivoting. And so each step builds on each other. So the fire is realizing that, there's burnout. You're acknowledging that there's burnout, moral injury, you need to do something about it. And then you start transitioning your mindset and exploring different options throughout the framework so that you can make a successful pivot. And so that includes things like research, networking, informational interviews, maybe even testing, trying out different jobs that you're interested in and seeing if it's a good fit. And then the final step is really making that transition, that pivot with intention, with a strategy in place. And I have a 90-day pivot framework that I utilize to help physicians really transition. Now, the whole pivot actually may take more than 90 days. It can take months to years, but the transition starts with that first 90 days. The same thing I utilize with people who are dealing with burnout. I have a 90-day framework for burnout, helping them with, maybe delegating things or setting boundaries or things like that to really help them focus on resetting, taking care of themselves, prioritizing their health, their mental health, and giving them a space to figure out what the next steps are, which I think is so.
Yeah, I agree. Space is just so important. And I like how you break it
Mm,
down. It's a long
mhm.
process, but I like how you break it down into chunks, right? So 30
Right.
days, 60 days, 90 days, so that, it's easier to set a goal and move towards it when you have those visualizable kind of chunks. So is this
Yes.
what you do through the Pinnacle Business Academy, or is this with your coaching practice,
Yes.
or are they intertwined?
Yes. So Pinnacle Business Academy is my coaching business. And so I provide one-on-one group coaching. I provide on-demand workshops and webinars or intensives, I call them, where there was small cohorts and helps you deal with burnout, pivoting, and then exploring different pathways. I also help with executive leadership because I am a physician executive. And, for physicians who are interested in leadership and exploring that, how do you do that? How do you develop and become a leader in the healthcare industry, or even in other industries? It's really fulfilling work. And extension of that is my podcast, where I provide a space where we talk about, those different transitions and provide a space to talk about burnout, career clarity, and reinvention. And then I also I have a whole bunch of books that are coming out very soon that will be focusing on how to make those transitions happen in more detail.
So tell us a little more about those books. How did you make the pivot from coaching to
Mhm.
being, an author, right? That
Mhm.
seems like a daunting jump, I bet, to a lot of people, as, oh,
Yes.
I'm gonna write a book.
Right.
That's a big deal. So tell us about that
Mhm.
process.
Well, the writing process, I've always loved reading, and I always learned so much from reading. I'm just an avid reader. And so I felt like compelled. I think my memoir that is being released this fall, called From Fire to Freedom, a memoir of transformation, resilience, and renewal, really jump started my writing passion. So I wrote about my own story, and then I really felt that, my voice, I felt like I needed to utilize my voice to share my experiences with
Mhm.
transitioning into different roles. I explored pharma and biotech, utilization management, medical expert work, and right now I do a hybrid career. So I utilize my own, personal experience and, to write books that were practical guides. I feel like a lot of physicians need a framework or a blueprint. It's everyone's journey is different, but you need some tools to utilize it. And these are the tools that I wish I had had when I was making my transitions. And so I wanted to share it with others.
I love that. And it's funny, people are hesitant, I think, sometimes to use these tools, but we learned medicine by relying on frameworks, right? Like
Exactly.
old carts and taking a history and doing a physical. Those were
Yes.
all frameworks that we use to develop our clinical skills, and it makes
Right.
sense that we would rely on those to pivot outside of medicine.
Correct. Yes.
So, what does success look like for you now? So in the past, physicians are
Mhm.
defined, right, by our white coats and our stethoscopes and
Yes.
our clinical acumen. What does success look like for you now and in 5 years?
So success used to mean achievement, productivity, RVUs, all of those things. But today, success means alignment. It means doing meaningful work, serving others, maintaining my health, my relationships with my loved ones, and creating a life that's sustainable, a life and career that's sustainable. I no longer define my success by titles alone. I really define it by purpose, peace, and impact. That's really what defines success for me now.
That's amazing. So where can people find your books when they come out? Will they be on Amazon? Will they be on multiple platforms? Where can people find your books?
So I created my own publishing imprint called Phoenix Ascend Press, and so I'm self-publishing my books. I'm working with partnership publishing group called Current Words Publishing, and my book will be available on Amazon. I have a KDP and an author page, and then I also will be selling them on my website, pinnaclebusinessacademy.org, and then they also will be in paperback, on-demand printing, ebooks, and audiobook.
Everything that you just said is a whole nother skill set that I bet people who are listening is like, how did you know how to do all of this? Is this something, how long did it take you to go from, I have an idea for a book, to I'm going to write a book, to this is coming out here in the very near future?
So the process it started in December 2022 when I was sitting in the hospital recovering from my illness and my amputation, and it's been a labor of love that I've been working on over the last 4 years. So it will be released, the first book of many, and then during that time, during the last 4 years, I've written a lot of the self-help book, but they just
Mhm.
kind of been waiting in the wings. I wanted to release my memoir first so people could get a little better sense of who I was, what my journey was, and then I will be releasing those other books afterwards.
Do you sleep is my question.
I do. I do, and I sleep very well, and I sleep more probably than I when I was working full-time clinically, which
Yes.
people may or may not believe, but I think the reason why I'm able to sleep is that I have a team that supports me. I don't do this alone.
Hmm, hmm.
I have a great team that helps me with social media management, digital marketing, my website, all of those things. I'm the strategist, but I would not be able to execute these things without my team, so I'm very grateful.
That is such an important lesson too, is figuring out what you want to hold on to and what you can give up and rely on
Right.
others to help you with, right?
Yes.
So for someone who's listening and is inspired and maybe a little bit exhausted and curious about your story, what would you tell them to do right now? What's one thing that they could hold on to from your story that maybe would give them hope or give them a next step for the future?
Yes. I would say that your identity is never completely should be never completely consumed by medicine. You're more than your white coat. You're a parent, you're a spouse, you're a caregiver, whatever your role is. And you have values, passions, goals that you should pursue because that's part of who you are, and those things matter. So I encourage physicians to, if you're experiencing burnout, this is not a sign that you're weak. It's you're not stuck. It's information. So you need to utilize these signals that you're dealing with, and you need to take that information and take time, space, maybe get a coach or a therapist, or spend time, gaining clarity about what you want in life. And
Mhm.
it's important to take that time because that is the way. It's like having a compass, right? When you're reading a map or you want to know what direction, in order to have your purpose, you need to have a compass. You need to have something to guide you in life. And you need to be constantly, spending time with yourself and determining who you are and what you want. And that may change throughout your career, but it's okay to give yourself permission to evolve. I would tell you that I am living the most fulfilled career that I can. And that's only because I gave myself the permission to do so. And you can do it as well.
Oh, yeah. Giving yourself permission is such a huge,
Yeah.
huge piece. So I know you mentioned it earlier, but tell people again where they can find you and find your information and work with you.
So I'm on all social media platforms, and my coaching platform is Pinnacle Business Academy.org. And I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn as well. And you can go to my website. You can book a clarity call to learn more about some of the services that I provide. The information is also on the website, so you can book coaching, on demand webinars, and intensives at your own pace. And you can also read any of the books that I'll be releasing very soon that will have more information. And most importantly, you can watch or subscribe on my podcast, the Mindful Practice podcast, which is every Wednesday on streaming on all platforms, including YouTube and LinkedIn. We have guests in addition to me hosting, sharing their experiences. And I feel like it's a very important space where these conversations need to happen, and physicians need to give themselves, the space to discuss and think about these things.
Absolutely. It can feel so lonely when you're going through burnout or
Yes.
moral injury or just questioning your path, and because it's not something that we talk about in the workroom in clinic,
No,
right? And so
no,
having spaces to have these conversations is so important, and I'm so
it
thankful that
is.
you're doing it.
Thank you so much.
Well, before we kind of wrap up here, is there anything else that you wanted to share with people?
Well, I wanted to say that I appreciate being on the podcast. I want to remind people that my memoir, From Fire to Freedom, will be released August 2026, and I'm very excited. And so you can pick up a copy on Amazon or my website. I have a personal website, BertinaHooksMD.org. And so you can learn more information about the book, sign up for more information. There's book trailers, and there's a book club that's going to be launched soon. So you can really learn about the different themes and that are being represented in the book.
Well, I'm actually motivated from hearing you talk about this. I'm going to sit down and think about what I want to do next. But
Yes.
Dr. Hooks, thank you so much for sharing this information. I think what I'm going to carry from this conversation is that a pivot or thinking about a change isn't a failure, and it's not a betrayal of that little girl or little boy who had thought, I want to be a doctor. It's just the next step in your career and in your personal
Yes.
evolution. And it's not necessary to leap. It's a gradual build building of the next step. And as you mentioned, it starts with values and clarity. Then you can position yourself and move. And so,
Yes.
and the reason that all of those steps matter is that it gives you space and time so that you can keep doing the work as a whole person, not as a depleted, burned out kind of
Yes.
shell of yourself.
So true. So true.
So if today resonated, as Dr. Hooks mentioned, she hosts the Mindful Practice podcast and works with physicians through the Pinnacle Business Academy. We'll put links in the show notes to her websites, her podcasts, as well as her social media in the show notes. So check those out. And to everyone listening, if you're standing in that gap between knowing and moving, take that as a signal, not as a verdict or a judgment. Use your heart more, not less. And you start that by knowing how to treat yourself and your career the same way that you would treat your patients or your loved ones. So this is Dr. Ben with the Developing Doctor podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.